Hey everybody, Casey here with Life Abstract Gaming, and today I thought I'd run an idea I had by you guys about what games would make up a college level course on introducing all the skills of a gamer to a novice, essentially Video Games 101. As I'm sure a lot of other gamer parents have thought about, at what point do you let your kids start playing video games, and what video games should you have them play? As you may or may not know, I have a little boy who's growing more and more curious about what dad is doing on the TV. And I'll let him watch or pretend to play with me on occasion, but he's actually a lot more obsessed with mobile and touchscreen games. A 2015 NPD Group report titled Kids in Gaming pretty much confirmed that this is a growing norm, as 63% of kids 2 to 17 years old prefer mobile games over consoles. But as parents who are conventional gamers, there's a desire to teach your kids to follow in your footsteps as opposed to the newer wave of mobile games, as one such parent did. A Kotaku article detailed a man named Andy Bayo who actually forced his son to play through most of gaming history chronologically. Starting at age 4 in 2008 with Galaxian, which was released on the Atari 2600 in 1979, and ending with games released by the time he was born in 2004, like Shadow of the Colossus on the PS1. The results of the experiment essentially gave his son Elliot a greater appreciation for what a game is rather than how good it looks, and also an extreme level of skill and gameplay competency. I'll post a link to the Kotaku article in the description. Those of us gamer parents who aren't insane, however, might want to go a more relaxed route to introduce a child or even an adult friend or spouse to modern video games. I've compiled a guide that targets specific games that will teach skills that translate to later games in important ways. You may not realize it, but there's a certain design language in games that people who have played for most of their lives know how to interpret, while a novice may be left confused or miss out on details altogether. Like when a game level tells you to go one way and you immediately check all the other pathways for hidden things before following the direction. That's a learned behavior from years of iterative game design that you as a gamer have buried in your brain. Lesson 1. Hand-eye coordination and puzzle solving. Ignoring virtual reality, motion control, and touchscreen gaming, a gamer's method of interacting with the game is usually a controller. Yet to look at a modern gamepad for the first time is actually pretty intimidating. The industry standard today is 4 face buttons, 2 option buttons, a D-pad, 2 control sticks, 2 shoulder buttons, and 2 triggers. With the average hardcore gamer's age hovering around 35 to 45 years old, you likely started from much humbler beginnings. These games will familiarize anyone with the basics of a controller, especially since they won't need to use all of the available buttons if you're playing them on newer machines with intimidating controllers. Each of these titles are simple concepts but wildly popular because their game design is brilliant. They will hold a person's attention and eventually train them to keep their eyes on the screen rather than having to look down at what their hands are doing. Lesson 2. Twitch reflexes and dexterity. After becoming familiar with the basics, I think that challenge needs to be introduced. Because while games that are too easy can become boring, games that are too hard can be off-putting and will keep players from ever coming back due to bad experiences. However, difficulty is relative. Beating a boss in Mega Man is a cakewalk if you know what you're doing, but might be impossible for, say, your mother. These games will introduce players to the thrill of accomplishing difficult tasks, using and expanding upon the basics picked up in Lesson 1. Then, they'll begin to train players to develop the ability to react to what's going on screen, as well as to pattern recognize and predict what's coming next. All of those skills can then be translated into fighting games, where after a player has become familiar with a character, they can learn difficult combos and feel satisfied with pulling them off. They can recognize attack patterns from opposing characters and react accordingly and even predict what they will do next based on past experiences. At this stage, most of the heavy lifting has been done. These lessons were meant to train your metaphorical gamer muscles to recognize how to play and how to play well, but the games going forward start to rely more heavily on your gamer brain. Lesson 3. Navigating 3D space, logical puzzle solving, and strategizing. At the point in time where games made the switch from primarily being 2D to mostly being 3D, new skills needed to be taught to players to convey in what ways they can move their character and in what ways they can't. The introduction of a controllable camera was also something that needed to be taught to players and perfected by designers. These games were some of the first to use those mechanics and train players to do so successfully. While there was puzzle solving in Lesson 1, that was more associated to actual puzzle games. Logic puzzles are far more common in modern games, and it's important that a player be able to recognize that they've just stumbled upon an area that they'll need to figure out before they can progress. These types of puzzles are most commonly found in adventure games, but also make appearances in a ton of other genres. These games will teach a player to more easily recognize the signs that there's more to a location than meets the eye. They'll train the ability to read the environment as either an active part of the gameplay or a passive location that doesn't offer anything deeper. In most cases, these kinds of puzzles are designed with one solution in mind, so a player just needs to read all the signs that lead to that answer. Players would then need to move on to the games that leave the solutions to these kinds of puzzles much more open-ended. You're given the tools, characters, or abilities, and it's up to you how to utilize them to then complete the tasks presented to you. When both kinds of game design elements are available to you, you get logic puzzles that can be solved in a multitude of ways, as long as the players are clever enough to work within or even outside the boundaries of the actual game. Once a player is able to see what a game intended for them to do, and also see an unintended but plausible method of achieving that same goal, I consider them at that point to be fully adept. Lesson 4. Heavy narrative and games as art. With the mechanics of gameplay and the knowledge base of video game tropes and regularity under your belt, players can now fully appreciate the kinds of games that subvert those mechanics, that knowledge, and those tropes. More and more game developers are experimenting with game design as a medium of expression. Video games from their very beginnings have included a level of artistry in their creation, but for the most part, the further you go back, the more you see games being defined by their gameplay alone. Today, a lot of games can immerse players in a narrative and compelling commentary as well as deep gameplay. Certain titles even lean heavier on the narrative side, giving the player agency in the form of decision-making rather than direct control, but they are still at their core gaming experiences, and I feel that they can only fully be appreciated once you're intimately familiar with what's come before. So, what do you think of my Intro to Video Games course load? Are there any games you'd want to swap out or any additional lessons you'd want to add? Let us know. We're listening.